To kick us off, I'd like to introduce our host for the event, Mike Coleman, MicroFocus Application Security Specialist.
Hey guys, welcome. May the 4th be with you. Just to level set for a second, why are we here? So I just wanted to explain some things real fast. We came up with this idea to talk about, hey, if May the 4th be with you, we have this really cool X factor thing called an enterprise dashboard. So it just fit perfectly into this whole day. So what we're going to do today is walk you through really fast what we found is a game changer for AppSec. And Dennis, if you could bring the deck up, that would be awesome.
Yep, I'd be happy to.
So what we want to talk about is in order to travel into hyperspace, in order to do that, you need to connect the dots. In order to connect the dots, meaning connect the multiple vectors, what we do is like to show you effectively what's the problem that people are experiencing. What's the problem statement or opportunity? So what we've seen in application security, just like traveling in hyperspace, when Einstein was thinking through it, it's how do you present a dashboard? How do you fill gaps? If you could go to the next page, that would be awesome. So how do you basically assimilate data to basically allow you to make really fast decisions, aggregate the data, and then be able to drive into hyperspace effectively? So get into that DevOps speed. And the real concern is that how do you give it to the business so that they can make decisions really fast without creating a denial of service attack on the database, and do it in a weekly, monthly, quarterly, or even daily perspective and just over time. And then the big thing is, how do you avoid trying to do this thing manually? How do you get it from multiple sources of data, which in the end you never can, right? It's just too laborious. So what's out there today? What's available today to make these kind of decisions? If we hit the next slide. So what we give you, for example, and tools like Fortify or other tools in the market or Fortify on Demand is the ability to give you dashboards based on actionable insights that it's providing, and then reporting like PDFs reports and so on based on compliance type issues. But what's really lacking is an enterprise dashboard to put all these disparate pieces of data together to give you visibility to go at really, really fast speeds and make fast decisions across your application portfolio, and then to be able to drive into those issues so that, again, you can get into the details. Let's go ahead and next slide. So that's the gap. So basically the objective was to figure out, Dennis is going to present, we were talking about 4.5 years ago with our largest clients who may be on the phone, I can't see them, but they're partnered with us to basically take a step back and say, how can we look at all these different vectors, static, dynamic, open source scanning, and as well as pen testing results, aggregate the data and be able to make these really fast decisions to scale massively and get sub-second response time. And then do it in a way it's highly configurable. I don't know if customizable is the right word. Customizable would probably be, to me, it's a code change. This is really a configuration. So 99% of what you're going to see is configuration. There's no coding involved. And then drive, what happens is you can drive that continuous improvement. So if I'm Darth Vader and I'm trying to protect my Death Star, I'm trying to figure out how do I make sure I'm not vulnerable to that one attack that's going to happen and blow me up. So what kind of visibility and control can I have? In the end, I want to open it up to multiple sources of data, not just our products, but other tools as well. And then the quick thing in today's world is you got to move fast, quick wins, we call it, in 2-week type sprints. Let's go forward. So what's it look like in terms of the components? So we looked at it, and again, in order to satisfy the requirements, these are the vectors that we decided to pull into this enterprise dashboard. From us, it was from Software Security Center as well as Fortify on Demand because we had access to it really fast. And Dennis looked at it with his team and made sure we found a way to make it scale massively. So he's going to show you that architecture of view in a minute. So the key of it, the real benefits is it's scalable massively to hundreds of users, thousands of users, highly scalable, HA, field, it's down to field level, role-based security. And the really cool thing, it's open, so you can extend it into other sources as you grow. Let's go ahead and hit enter. And these are really, what's really cool about this is depending on your role as a user. So if I'm Darth Vader, i.e. if I'm a VP of development or a CIO, I can ask the questions, how am I doing from a portfolio risk perspective? And then I can drive into the details of those questions over time, which would be a killer type thing if you try to query one of our databases, for example, with SQL query, you would hit it, you'd probably do a denial of service attack and take it down. In the end, these are the questions that you can answer. And then in the end, you can export this data into pie charts and graphs to actually create ways to give it to board members or executives to even tie bonuses to this type of data. So Dennis, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So just to get into a bit of the architecture of what we're doing under the covers with SaltMiner, it's a couple of processes that we put together, and the way we do it, I think, helps to understand a lot of the value of what we're doing. So if you think about what you've got lots of different assessment solutions. So the example we're going to do today, we used our environment for it, and we've got Fortify on-premise, we've got Fortify on demand, we've got Sonatype coming through Fortify. We even wrote our own little custom parser that pushes things into Fortify SSC. You could have other solutions as well, but this is just kind of our demo environment. And the problem we're trying to solve is, A, how do you get all that data into a common source? Even among the Fortify family of products, for example, the data varies. So if you use FOD versus Fortify on-premise, static versus dynamic, we first have to normalize that. So what SaltMiner does is it synchronizes from different sources, pulls that into a common set of indices. It then goes through what I consider to be one of the bigger value adds, is the ability, when it normalizes that data, to also use a bit of custom code that we can do for your applications or your environment to go out and get information from your CMDB. So for example, to use Mike's example, if I'm Darth Vader, that's probably not in Fortify or Fortify on demand or whatever assessment tool you're using. I need to go off to some sort of application database and pull all that metadata. So who are the business owners? What's the business unit? All those kinds of things. And we can do that at line speed. So we've got it architected where it's designed specifically to be integrated with other people's solutions, but done in a consistent way. And to Mike's point, with a minimum amount of code. So even things like calling an external database is somewhere in the 5 lines of code range. So it's very easy to do. We then take that data, put it into an enterprise dashboard. Specifically, it's Elastic underneath the covers and Kibana on the front end. And we did that on purpose. So we wanted something that was very open, something that you could get to for your data, also something that's scaled. Because the use case that we see a lot, there's different users of SaltMiner, but really one of the more common use cases is people want to give developers and executives and VPs of development access to this data, and that can be thousands of users. So we didn't want to have the problem of getting slowed down. So when we architect the system, we use Kibana as our front-end graphics engine. That's Elasticsearch's front-end reporting system. And then we can cluster Elasticsearch nodes. So if you're not familiar with Elasticsearch, one of the values of that is we can scale horizontally. So if we need more search capacity to handle thousands of users, we can just add additional nodes. And it's designed out of the box to do that. And then like Mike was saying, you also get kind of for free as a part of that, the fact that we can support high availability. So we can cluster across zones. If you're in the cloud, we have a lot of flexibility to manage that. And then we can finally integrate with whatever your security server is. For example, Active Directory is a super common way that people do authentication. We can do row-level security based on your Active Directory identity. So we integrate fully. People don't have extra passwords. It's very industry standard. So that was one of the reasons that we chose the Elastic under the covers and Kibana as the top end, and the visualization mechanism was just because it scales so well, both in terms of load and in terms of integration ease. So that's the quick review of the general architecture that we've got. Next, what I'd like to do is jump into our demo. So let me switch over real quick. So once we get everything into SaltMiner, so we've taken vulnerabilities from, like I said, Fortify on demand, Fortify on premise. We even wrote a custom parser for Fortify, so we've got some pen test stuff in here. We've got all of these vulnerabilities, and they've been pulled in as in a industry standard format. The standard is called ECS. It's just an industry standard format for reporting IT data, including vulnerabilities. So we've used that. Our goal there was that it is open, it's common, anybody can query it, but it's pulled into this common format. So I'll walk you through just a couple of sort of day in the life use cases real quick to show you how this would work on a day-to-day basis. So let's say that I'm Darth Vader, and I've got an application that's going to go live. It's called the Death Star, and this thing's about to go into production. And I know that those pesky rebels are going to try to attack it. So I'd want to be able to go in pretty quickly and show me my vulnerabilities that are mine. So right now I'm just kind of seeing everything. So if we look at the faction, we've got Empire stuff in there, we got Rebel stuff, we got Republic stuff, we got all kinds of stuff in here. So what I want to do is say, let me just focus down on what I actually care about. So I could filter by Empire, for example. And in this case, we're going to say that the Empire is business unit. You can kind of think of it as who's the business unit that we're looking at. And one of the reasons we use Star Wars for this, by the way, obviously it's May 4th, but also to remind you that when we do the importing of that custom data, it's your data. Every environment's going to be different. Most companies won't have faction, for example. You would have business unit or something else. Whatever you call it, we can bring it in with that name. And now, very quickly, I can see the Empire currently has 814 critical vulnerabilities. So we kind of have a real high-level, quick view of what are my vulnerabilities just for the Empire, for example. We can drill down and see what kinds of vulnerabilities do we have. We can see that we've got criticals, highs, mediums, and lows. Now, one of the primary goals of SaltMiner is to give you the ability to focus. And Mike mentioned that when he was talking of, I want to be able to ask what-if questions very quickly. So, for example, if I wanted to filter and say, just show me critical stuff. Well, it's not, you don't have to learn a query language. You just click on critical. And now it's showing me just critical vulnerabilities. So now we're down to 814 of them. I can scroll down a bit more, and we're going to show you which applications have those vulnerabilities by critical, high, medium, low counts. We're even going to go down to the version level. And this is something we did put in the ECS format because most applications have versions. It's kind of a common logic in an application. So we can see that the Empire appears to own all of these applications and all of these versions. And sure enough, there's the faction Empire. And we've got our criticals, highs, mediums, and lows. As we drill down a little bit further into the dashboarding, we can see when were the vulnerabilities found. So we can look at data as a time series function. So I can say, when did we find things? When did we fix things? We can also look at, because we know when things were found and when they were fixed, we can do what's called a technical dashboard. And what this is showing is when were vulnerabilities introduced and when were those vulnerabilities fixed or removed. So when did we find them, when did we remove them? And at a point in time, how many vulnerabilities do we have? So for example, we can look back on January of 2020. Looks like we found 273 vulnerabilities. Those stayed open. It looks like we did something else and found 585, or actually 306 new ones, which gave us a total of 585 vulnerabilities. And over time, our vulnerabilities kept going up. So if I'm the ruler of the Empire, this is bad. What I know is my technical debt keeps going up, but I haven't fixed anything. So I know that I have a challenge that I need to go address. And as we come all the way down, we can even go look at a very low level, at a very detailed view of what these vulnerabilities are. So we've got the ability to go from very high level to very low level. So let's go back to our Darth Vader example. I am Darth Vader, so I'm the business owner, and I'm Darth Vader. And I want to know what's going on with applications that I own. So it looks like we've got 53 vulnerabilities that are mine personally. So if I were doing a review before we tried to turn the Death Star on, I want to know who's going to come after me. So this is showing me, for example, all of my critical vulnerabilities, and we could remove that little critical filter real quick. Now I'm seeing all the vulnerabilities that are related, that are owned by me. I'm Darth Vader, and we can see what kind of vulnerabilities we've got. But let's say that we are Darth Vader still, and somebody told us that a penetration test was just done, and we really want to go see what's going on with that. So I can filter and say, well, what kind of results are these? So remember we talked that we're integrating results from multiple sources. So we can tell you what kind of vulnerability is it, or how was it discovered? So I could come in and say, well, these guys, everybody's just told me that it's a penetration test. So let's filter down to just penetration tests that I'm the owner of, and I'm Darth Vader. Notice now we're down to about 53 criticals, 50 highs. We've got a good selection of them. And I know now that these all came in just through the penetration test. But we want to focus. We want to just look at criticals. So I click on the little critical button. and now it's showing me my vulnerabilities. So I would want to go through this before we turn the Death Star on, or in the web application world, before we made this application live, and ask the question, have I got some kind of mitigation for these vulnerabilities? Pen testers found them, they're there. Then I see this one that I've never seen before called thermal exhaust port access weakness. So let's click on the executive, Darth Vader, the executive. At no point in time did I have to understand querying. I just had to click. I just know how to click and go find my vulnerabilities. So now I know very quickly that it looks like the Death Star monitoring system has this vulnerability. And it looks like it's been out there for a while. So this would be really important to me, by the way. This tells me that these pen test vulnerabilities were discovered back of May of 2020. So these things have been out there for a while. So if you remember your Star Wars lore, you know that the plans for the Death Star were discovered during Rogue One, and then they shipped them off and blew up the Death Star. So kind of the same thing happens in vulnerabilities. We find vulnerabilities, they now exist. Other people can find them as well, and they stay out there for a long time. And the longer they stay, the worse it is. So now I've narrowed down to not only that I have vulnerabilities, but they've been out there for a good bit of time. That's bad. So then I could come all the way down to the bottom and look at the actual vulnerabilities. And let's say I want to dump this out and send a spreadsheet to somebody and tell them to look at it. I can download that to a CSV. And that's going to show me what the vulnerabilities are. And we can even go all the way to see all the attributes, to go from very, very high level data. For example, who's the owner, all the way down to the vulnerability itself. So we can go from these use cases of, what do I own? How was the vulnerability discovered? What kind of vulnerability is? And if you know about Star Wars, it was this was the vulnerability that got them owned, by the way. So that was, if you remember, Luke shoots his missile down the, what's it called? Thermal exhaust port. And that's what blows up the Death Star. So the goal there is they knew about the issue, but they didn't find it fast enough. So that's kind of one use case. I really want to dig into details. The other use case that we see a lot of times is more process cases. A process case is something that I would consider to be like, I want to know how my team is doing. So, for example, if I'm Luke Skywalker and I want to know how the rebels are doing with our application security program, just kind of overall high level, I can use filtering for that, and it's going to show me again how many vulnerabilities we've got, what kind they are. But normally where I'm going to come is down here. I'm going to look at, when are we finding vulnerabilities? For example, it's a little disturbing. We found some vulnerabilities back in 2018 and have them fix them. I would probably want to know that. We can also see kind of a cadence of when scans are occurring. So we know that there's some kind of challenge here. We're not really assessing enough. We know that we can see from a process perspective, we're not fixing technical debt. And honestly, this graph is one of the ones that people tend to like the most. It shows them what's been their technical debt over time. So if you see the red line going up, that's telling you that your vulnerabilities or your technical debt is increasing over time. And once it starts going down, you're fixing things. So ideally, when you start assessing with a new solution, obviously your issue is going to jump up, but then after a while, they're going to start going back down. And that's what we expect to see. If you don't see it going back down like our friends that Luke Skywalker is looking at, that's a bad thing. So it helps us understand not only what are vulnerabilities, but how have those vulnerabilities changed over time. Other use cases that we've got that are fairly common is where we maybe want to create a dashboard for executives that's the quick screenshot, high-level view. You want to put it up on a monitor somewhere. We can do that as well. So this is one of the dashboards, and let me just put this in full screen mode. So for example, this dashboard, we can do a lot of things that are very graphical. You can almost think of this as PowerPoint with live data. So we can put backgrounds on things. We can put different screens on things. We can color code things. We can take any of the graphics that we saw in the previous screens or more and put them on here. So this is the kind of screen you would put up in your NOC, up on a big screen somewhere so people can see how the process is going. And we can customize it very easily. And, like Mike said, it's a lot of configuration or a bit of configuration to get this working like you want. But we can do things like put your logos on it. and try to give that very quick graphical set of information that executives or large groups of people might want. And we can make it look completely different. So this is the one for the dark side, or if you're on the light side, we can do the same thing with the same kind of graphics. So we've got the ability to go from this very high level, quick view, all the way down, like we saw before, where we're digging into particular vulnerabilities. One thing to note also in this, and we mentioned it a bit in the PowerPoint, was security. So when I log in, the only things I see are the things I have the rights to see. And we can configure that actually based on data. So for example, if you wanted to put in a security rule that says Darth Vader could only see results from the Republic, then we could make that a rule. And there's a lot of different ways that we can configure those rights. That way, when a user comes in, they see the full screen, but the only data they see or that they can query is going to be what they have the rights to. That also applies to these big dashboards, which are called canvases. We can apply the same rights. We can even apply those rights all the way down to an API level. So if somebody wants to query this data from some external system, but you want to limit what they can get to, that's super easy because security is managed all the way down at the API level, and we can set what data that user or that credential has access to, or that token has access to. So if they want to query it from an API and use some other graphical solution or stick it on another dashboard, not a problem at all. We can integrate that. So that's a fairly quick overview, but a couple of the common use cases that we see. When we're setting folks up, it's either those high-level views or that more low-level kind of view.
Hey, Dennis, we got a question in the queue. Just as a heads up. The question is that time-based reporting able to look back one day or day one, or does it start collecting on day one and need time to capture?
Good question. That's actually a really good question. So it depends on where the data source is. Luckily, Fortify and Fortify on Demand both keep track of the found date. So when you run a scan with either of those solutions, static, dynamic, whatever it is, they track when that vulnerability was discovered. So if it's coming out of Fortify, you're in luck, we can actually go back and retrofit this. So for example, our scans are from 2018. Obviously, this is not a 2018 solution. So it does keep those. Now, if it's a solution that does not support that, there are some other scanning solutions, network scanners, for example. They don't keep track of that. All they do is say, hey, I found this thing. In the case where the solution doesn't track the found date, we will only be able to track it from the day that you feed the first one to us. But if it's any of the Fortify family of solutions, you're good to go. It tracks all of that, especially SSC and FOD. So that's easy.
Yeah. So if you had the past 2 years worth of scans from, for example, SSC, Software Security Center, or FOD, could you start running trend analysis?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can do that day one, because it's going to go back and look at, in the Fortify data, there's a found date. Fortify tracks the first date that it was found. So it gets tracked all the way through. So we can pull the date it was found, even if it was fixed, for example. So in this case, when something is removed, Fortify actually continues to track the vulnerability. It simply gives it a removed date. So then we know what day that was removed. So all of that's tracked from day one. So yeah, if you've got Fortify running or Fortify Demand, both are conveniently do it, we can rebuild the history starting day one.
Awesome.
Actually, this one came from that. This is my test, Serper.
Okay, I noticed there was CMDB integration here in the tool. Mm-hmm. So is that integration, can we pull like system owners or application owners in that in the dashboard? Is it like interactive, or it's refreshing the ownership information on certain or regular intervals, and can it be tuned somehow? Trying to understand.
Good question. Yes, and let me go back to this one. So the database integration here. So what we typically do is we would have one application. So SaltMiner is going to look at a particular set of indices for the CMDB data. So when this ETL process runs, for the purposes of speed, it looks in a local cache for its CMDB data. When we do the implementation, what we'll do is simply write a little script that will go to your CMDB and refresh that. And we can do that as often as you want. Usually CMDBs aren't, if you're talking about an application inventory especially, you're typically talking less than a few thousand records. So that can be updated very rapidly. And we could do that every couple of hours if you wanted us to. But every 3 hours is average. If I had to say across customers, we'll refresh the CMDB data every, say, 3 hours. And then so when the ETL runs, it picks up that change so that it's represented in SaltMiner on average between every 3 hours and every day, just depending on how big and complex things are. But good question. That's actually one of the major things we look for is when does the CMDB change? Because obviously if an application owner changes, for example, that's a big deal because now this new person, we actually had exactly that use case. One of our large customers, one CIO picked up an entire new business division, and day one, he wanted to know, what are my vulnerabilities? So because we were synchronizing their CMDB frequently, it populated within about 3 hours, and he was able to go figure out where he was. Good question.
So this dashboard, is it part of the subscription or it is something we need to acquire separately?
This is separate. So you're talking about with the subscription to Fortify On Demand?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is. It is separate. Okay. And Mike can give you more information on that, but it is separate and it also supports additional solutions. Other things you may want to pull in as well.
Yes. So you're saying additional solutions, meaning if we have some other security tools, so it can go and pull those vulnerability data from there.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So for example, right now we're in the process of adding a couple of the various container security solutions. So if you're using Docker and you're going to scan those Docker containers, that's not something Fortify does. So we want to let you pull that data in. We're also pulling in network assessment data, especially network data related to ports and web traffic. So that's also not something that Fortify does. That's kind of a different family of solutions. So we support additional tools. We can get you the list of those as well.
Yeah, fantastic question. And just to wrap up, so this session is being recorded. If you're interested, we obviously will share the recording, socialize it with whomever you'd like to. And the real key to this is we're trying to share the story of how to really improve the opportunity to do your job, right, at the end of the day. Because I don't know what you guys are experiencing, but everyone has to do things more with less. Every day there's being more required on everybody. And it's not getting any easier. The velocity of the number of applications that have to be tested and the amount of work is just going to increase significantly by 2 to 3x over the next couple of years, if not already. So we really appreciate you guys joining today. And really, so if you're interested, we can set up a separate session individually to answer whatever questions or do demos. And